Happy Thursday! I'm Blair from Handmade, and it's time for another quilting and answer video tip. Every Thursday, I bring you video tips to help us all be better quilters, and today I'm talking about the term spinning seams. Is quilt speak for reducing bulk, basically. So maybe you've made one or two quilts, you've never come across this term. So let me explain. Normally, when we sew a seam in patchwork, a 1/4 inch seam, we press the seam allowances to one side or the other. And usually it's the darker side. So what I mean is, I've sewn my seams on these guys. I'm putting them on my ironing surface. Here's my seam allowance. And a little tip, if you put the darker of the two fabrics facing up on your ironing surface and then you press, you automatically press your seam allowances to the darker side, which is typically what you would do. So I just roll it open and press it. So now you can see my seam allowances go to the darker side. So then if I'm going to turn this into a 4-patch, I'm going to flip the unit so that it's positioned like this. And then right sides together. I'm going to line up that center seam. And because I've pressed each of the seam allowances to the darker side on these units, what you find is that your seam allowances will now nest. Let me get that in the picture there. So they will nest, which makes a much smoother seam and a much better seam join. So you would sew your 1/4 inch seam, pin if you need to, don't overpin, maybe 1 pin or so, and then you would iron that open. But instead of ironing the seam allowance for that new seam to one side or the other, which is going to be either that side or that side, you want to try something different, because if you iron it all to one side, then this center area here has several layers of fabric in it, and it's going to be very bulky. Not that it matters on a block or two, but if you're making a whole quilt of blocks with really bulky seams like this, then a lot of times if you press your seams or press your quilt top or use starch or anything like that, it can actually make this area shiny over time, and also it can also distort your free motion quilting. So how do we reduce the bulk? Think of it as literally spinning. So you want all of your seam allowances to go in the same direction. So in this case, all of my seam allowances are going in a clockwise direction. So when I sewed this seam to sew these two pairs together, I took my fingers and gently, this is before I ironed, I gently pulled this area open. And sometimes you might need a seam ripper to just loosen a seam or two. And then what you have left is this cute little dollhouse sized 4-patch. All of your seams are facing in the same direction. It can be clockwise or counterclockwise. Mine just happen to be clockwise. And then what you have left is this much flatter seam. You don't have as much bulk there in the center. It's a nice smooth seam. So comment and let me know if you spin your seams. and if you find a big difference when you do it. In the meantime, you can find more tips, tools, patterns, and tutorials at my website, Wisecraft Handmade, and I will see you